Hey there, nerds. Welcome back to another edition of Two Nerdy Dads. With me, as always, is Jason Applegate. Hey, Jason.
Hey everybody, how's it going?
And back again, we had the third Musketeer, Kyle Palladino.
Hello, out there in Google world.
You must
So it's
forgive
our
Kyle.
second episode of
It's
Three
the New
Nerdy
York
Dads.
Yankees game, so he might be a little busy at times. Anyway, what's it?
I was just saying it's the second episode of Three Nerdy Dads. Is what we've got going on today.
That is true, and a great mention because we forgot what number we are with Two Nerdy Dads, so it's nice to start over. Hey!
That's my huge cat. He decided to guest star. He wanted it to be 4 nerds.
Wow, there is a wonderful Johnny Carson joke there that is not appropriate.
Or a joke from Goldfinger. That's completely appropriate.
What was that character's name, Kyle?
Kitty? Kitty? No, Pussy
Lots
Galore.
of kitties. Lots of kitties.
Something galore.
Uh,
Well, what a great start. I don't think anybody's going to turn us off now. Okay, what do we have going on this week?
in the way of news, the latest thing that I just came across, which I'm surprised I hadn't heard of this before, is apparently there's going to be a new Justice League cartoon. The title I saw was JLA instead of just Justice League, so I don't know if they're going to actually throw in the, of America, because if you remember, Justice League was just like the 5 or 6 central characters that we all know and recognize, and then they went to Justice League Unlimited, where they brought in like gobs of characters that you needed to bust out the encyclopedia to see who it was. But it looks like they're starting it over. I haven't seen much about what it's going to involve, but I thought we could reminisce back into our stomping days when we had the Super Friends when we were kids growing up. Yeah, old school, and then really not much in the way of superhero cartoons until the 90s, DC-wise anyway, with the Batman the Animated Series, then Superman the Animated Series, and then Justice League. So I thought we could visit each of those. Let's start with the Super Friends. I mean, how much did you guys watch that? I know that was on a lot when we were kids. But were you guys into that as much as I was, or what?
I feel like I watched it a lot, but I don't remember specific things. I think we were pretty young when it was on. So I don't remember a ton about it. I remember the twins, Wonder Twins Power. That was always awesome to me. I'm sure if I watched it now, that would be the dumbest thing ever. But as a kid, that was like awesome. But yeah, I just basically remember the big 3: Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. And of course, the Hall of Justice, and then was it the Legion of Doom? Is that what was the the bad guys?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
the Hall of Doom. The Hall of Doom, yeah, and it looked like Darth Vader's mask, that would come out of the swamp and then go back down. And you had the Legion of Doom. There were like 12 of them. You had great villains: Lex Luthor, you had Grodd, you had the Scarecrow, you had Cheetah, you had Sinestro. Just a lot of classic villains. I almost liked the villains as a kid more than the heroes.
Was Black Manta there? I vaguely remember.
Oh yeah,
that.
I can't believe I didn't mention Black Manta. Yeah, he was great. The voice acting for him was phenomenal.
My son goes to school with a boy whose last name is Grundy, and so I always think of him when I think about one of the villains. I'm like, is that you? He was in trouble again today.
Was he born on a Monday?
I'm not sure. I will check it out.
We'll have to find that out. Get to the bottom of that.
So if I'm not mistaken, the early 70s were like 45-minute episodes. And that was where you would get the slower animation with also the, if I'm not mistaken, Ted Knight's narration, like Aquaman, sensing that Super Friends would need him, alert the dolphins to come to the rescue. And then I think that was also different from the Wonder Twins, but I'll have to do some checking on that, where if you are a feminist, I'm pretty sure you always, if you were, was she Zaina or Jaina? She always got the cool thing
Yeah.
And the guy always got the lame thing, so she would be like the elephant, and he'd be like the bucket of water.
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah, I think
probably they were trying to make Aquaman look good by giving him the lamest powers possible. He could be
Yeah.
some form of water. My favorite
Yeah.
is when he was like an ice pole, and she'd like slide down. It's just like, okay, good job.
Yay!
And of course, they parody that a lot in modern cartoons and stuff now, where they have the Wonder Twins on. But yeah, the Wonder Twins, I think, are one that stands out. I think before that, you had another couple of kids. There was a boy and a girl, and almost a Scooby-Doo dog that was was that typical talking dog kind of thing. And I don't remember what his name was, but that was I don't think those aired as much when we were kids, because you're right. I think the 80s when they were when the Wonder Twins were involved, and then even after that, I think that they aired other episodes without or maybe they were before the Wonder Twins and they just re-aired them. But I remember there were some without the Wonder Twins, and they would do those sort of like after school special kind of in between G.I. Joe message things where some kids would get in trouble. And somebody wants them to smoke or something, and then here comes Apache Chief, who tells them, don't do that because it's bad for you, and don't make bad choices and all that jazz. Which reminds me, the other really cool thing about the Super Friends was that it did bring in some diversity into the superhero. While it was sort of forced diversity, they kind of, shoved it in there. It was kind of interesting that they came up with 3 characters that represented, I would say now, very stereotypically, but at the time, I think it was kind of progressive. You had Apache Chief, who was the Native American, and of course his powers were he was really good at tracking people, not racist at all, right? And that he could grow really big. And he would say, what did he say? In a jock, I think is what it was, or something like that. And then he would just, and he would grow. And so that was, he could fight Giganta, which, was kind of borderline domestic violence. But in Justice League, nobody actually punched anyone. If you watch the old cartoons, and watch the old Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, too, and no one ever hits anyone. Like, they, wrap them up, or, Superman will put some sort of container over the top of them, but a punch is never thrown, and it's really interesting to see how far cartoons have sort of changed since then. To get back to the diversity, though, you had Samurai. I think it was just his name was just the Samurai, and he had the tornado power, and then you had Black Lightning, of course. Or Black Vulcan, I think was his name in the cartoon, and later in the comics they changed it to Black Lightning. And of course, Black Vulcan had the most absolutely ridiculous costume. Google it right now if you get a chance, because he looks like he's wearing a really bad swimsuit, almost like a woman's swimsuit, and he's got his bare legs and these really bad, almost worse than Flash's ear things that come up off the top of his head, and a big lightning bolt down. It's the worst costume. Just the worst. Do you guys remember those guys, or?
I remember Apache. I vaguely remember Black Vulture. I do not remember Samurai.
I purchased some on DVD, I don't know, 10 or 12 years ago. So we have a couple episodes in the house, and if I'm not mistaken, Apache makes an appearance, as does the Samurai. I can't remember if I've forgotten something that's so unforgettable as the costume you just described, but it's possible.
Well, and I guess if I remember right, the Samurai has a similar costume in that it's this sort of unitard without the legs, but his kind of come more to a point, and I don't think he had long sleeves. I want to say Black Vulcan had he had long sleeves too. It just is absurd. It just looks really, really bad. And then of course the other thing that's fun to watch when you watch those old episodes, which I watched them when my son was really little, and we didn't want him to see a lot of stuff with violence, but he was big on superheroes and stuff. but it was fun to watch the animation errors where, like, in one shot, the bat symbol would get reversed where it was yellow where it was supposed to be black, and black where it was supposed to be yellow. But some of my favorites would be when all of a sudden Batman wouldn't have pants on because they colored his legs as like the skin tone instead of the tights, so it looks like he's just standing there in his underwear instead. Or all of a sudden Batman wouldn't have a glove when he would reach for something, and then in the next shot he would have one. Just those really cheesy animation errors, because they obviously sent them off. If I remember reading about this right, they would do the storyboards, and then they would send them to a company in Japan, and the animators in Japan would animate it and then send it back, and that's why a lot of things would be goofed. And of course, they did it on the cheap, so much so they aren't going to fix those errors. They just left them in there.
I noticed that with, I think, all the appearances also that Batman and Robin make on the Scooby-Doo cartoon.
Yes.
So there's a little bit of that in each episode where you're like, did the Bat logo just disappear?
Yeah.
Was it yellow and blue? Or was it supposed to be black and yellow? Or is it... So yeah, I've seen those same things. I'm not sure, Jason, if you ever saw the episode where they feature how cartoons are made, where they show them sending the scripts over to Korea, and there's like an American soldier there poking the barrel of his gun right on the back of the Japanese cartoonist, like, get to work, is pretty much the implication that they make. So there you have it, 25 years later after your reference, or 20 years later. It's pretty funny.
I also want to go back to your Black Vulcan. It hit a note when you said Black Lightning, because we've interviewed Tony Isabella, who created Black Lightning, who's from Medina, Ohio. Huh. He was in a dispute with DC at the time, so they created Black Vulcan instead of using Black Lightning.
That's what it was. They changed the name purposefully. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's clearly a ripoff.
Oh, whoa. Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, but it was, while you look back on it now and it's really cheesy and, borderline, if not blatantly racist, for the time it was kind of cool to have these characters that were superheroes, or even just cartoon characters, period, that represented different races that some people could identify with that maybe had nothing to identify with before. And, moving along into the, jump ahead another 10 years and look at Batman the Animated Series, and I don't know if there's a single cartoon that has had more influence over our perceptions of a character, and even has stirred the pot or influenced the comic book narrative than Batman the Animated Series, which of course came out after Batman 1989 did. Right before Batman Returns came out is when those cartoons started to air. And some of the unique things about that cartoon were, one, it was drawn on black paper, which I thought was phenomenal when I watched that and found out that's what they were doing, because it made everything dark. It was all really gritty, and it had a style to it, this sort of Art Deco style to it that made it both timeless, because the cars looked kind of like 1940s. They're, the civilians were dressed like they were like 30s or 40s, but the Art Deco was 30s and 40s, but you had modern technology for the time. Now it's dated, and so it kind of put it in this sort of time capsule thing, but it still had that sort of tribute to the Burton films that were going on, and it really captured who Batman was. And of course, we all love Kevin Conroy as Batman and the voice of Batman, and he was the first one to really do a Bruce Wayne voice and a Batman voice, and I think he did it very, very well. The other things that come out of that series, of course, are, the first thing everyone will point to, of course, is Harley Quinn. And the popularity of that character emerging from that series, which is where she originated. She wasn't in anything before that. And then later on, she gets put into the comic book universe, and now we are going to see her in the film universe, too. for the first time, which is pretty cool.
I also believe that show started at primetime as an animation, which was really rare for a cartoon to be on at that time, primetime. Now we have, Simpsons, and we have Bob's Burgers and a whole bunch of other ones. But I believe at the time, Batman originally started in primetime.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Go ahead, Jason.
The other thing I wanted to say about it that some people may not realize is that there were small tweaks to some of the other Batman characters that people, when they read them today, don't realize can be traced back to Batman the Animated Series. One of them is Mr. Freeze. Before Batman the Animated Series, Mr. Freeze was really like a D-list villain. He was just a cold copycat. Captain Cold was like the Frozen villain. He was the one that everybody knew. He fought the Flash. He was one of Flash's arch enemies. And so Mr. Freeze was just a copycat of that. And he was kind of a lame villain. Nobody really liked to have him in there. And then in that series, they gave him that storyline and made him a tragic villain where he was, in this industrial accident, of course, which is kind of typical. But adding the storyline of him trying to save his wife by cryogenically freezing her was touching. And that episode ended up winning an Emmy because of how well it was written and the portrayal of that villain as a sympathetic character. And so of course, you see it in the terrible reincarnation of Batman and Robin, which we all hate, but that's become a part of the storyline now in the comics as well, and it makes that character more interesting. Another one people might not know of is the ventriloquist, which I also really enjoyed as a character. And he was, in the Batman comics, a joke. He was a terrible ventriloquist. Like, if you read the old episodes, they purposely write his dialogue as like really bad, like slurred, and he can't say words correctly and stuff. And in the animated version, they change it to they emphasize the psychological, and they make it as though this is sort of a split personality, and that the dummy and the ventriloquist are two separate personalities merged into one. And I just think it's fantastic, and it's also creepy to have that. They're playing on the creepiness of having a doll that's speaking, like we see in other things like Chucky and things like that. They just creep people out.
And you didn't even mention the reemergence of one of the best voices ever for the Joker.
Oh, of course.
Campbell.
Yes.
Man crush.
Yeah, right? And brilliant and of course we'll hear him again in the animated version of The Killing Joke, because he'll be playing the Joker in that, which is fantastic. But you're absolutely right. I remember the first time I saw his name in the credits wasn't until Batman Mask of the Phantasm came out on Christmas into the movies, which didn't do terribly well, but it's actually a really good animated film. But it was scrolling there that I saw it for the first time, because before that, those credits would go by so fast you can't see the names at all. And I remember seeing that, and I'm like, wait a second. Luke Skywalker? And I had to, look it up, and of course we didn't have IMDb back then or anything like that, so it was kind of hard to find that out. And sure enough, there it was, Mark Hamill, and he's a fantastic voice actor. Just fantastic.
I agree. I think my own take on Mask of the just the animated series first, is I thought the voice work for all of the villains were good, and they all had some nice diversity. I wasn't familiar with the comics, so this is really my introduction to the Batman villainy. And you had the Croc. I love both episodes with the Clock King. Those are two of my favorites ever in terms of writing. I thought Penguin was well done. I thought Edward Nygma was well done. I thought, Joker's great. By the way, Mask of the Phantasm, Jason, when he has to reach for either a blunt weapon or a sausage, right? He hits Batman with the sausage.
Right. That's a great moment.
Yeah, best part of the movie. But I thought the writing for the animated series was tight, in addition to the storylines I thought were really good. I didn't follow things in the 90s that well, but I feel like Paul Dini is the name that I see a lot through the DC animated universe that I think is not everything that he touches turns to gold, but I know that I at least want to give it a shot. The other part that I liked about the animated series is it covered a couple of things that I probably would have never put storylines on because I was 18 at the time. But like the doctor that helped Bruce Wayne through all of his stuff, Leslie
Thompson, I think.
Leslie Thompson. And I really thought it was fun that the bad guys tracked down the Batmobile to the Batmobile mechanic in one episode. I thought that was fun. I thought the origin of Robin was pretty harsh to watch.
Yeah, that was brutal. Good stuff, but brutal.
Great episodes. But I mean, some of the best writing that took place in animated was 20 years ago, and it still hasn't been eclipsed, I don't think.
Yeah, and I think it really had its own style, which we started to talk about, and I really feel like that diminished once we went into Justice League and Justice League United. It still had that style that Batman did, the way that they drew the bodies and stuff, but it lacked the artistic value, and I really felt that was partially due to the backgrounds probably being transferring over to computer instead of actually physically drawing them in or painting them onto that black paper. So you lose a little bit of that, but still, all in all, influential. And you're exactly right, Kyle. Like, the storytelling was fantastic. It was the writing and what they did with the characters and how they took characters like you're talking about, like the Clock King, who's like a 70s villain that nobody cares about or knows, and they made him cool. They made him interesting. And there was always something that was human about everybody, even Killer Croc. There was something about those characters that made you relate to them, sympathize with them a little bit. So writing was definitely central. Yeah. Speaking of writing, we're going to move into the latest on Frank Miller and The Dark Knight 3. And nowhere near as good as what we see with Batman the Animated Series. If you know me, you know how much I have despised Miller ever since he did Dark Knight 2. He just hasn't done anything good since The Dark Knight Returns, as far as Batman is concerned. And the latest image that I saw of Dark Knight 3, it's of Superman and the Atom. Why it's of them and not Batman, I don't know, but it is awful. Awful.
Well, it's weird. The cover says Dark Knight Return or Dark Knight Universe presents the Atom #1. So I am so confused what they're accomplishing by this. And the artwork looks like my 9-year-old son drew this, found a time machine, went back in time and told his 6-year-old self to recreate this, and then made this thing, and it's awful. It's horrible.
If you look at Dark Knight Returns, the first, so that's the first series, which a lot of people they might not know it. They're hearing Dark Knight and they think Heath Ledger and stuff. But you look at that, and you look at Frank Miller's art in it, and it's unique. It's different than it's not pretty to look at, but it's gritty. It plays into the storytelling. And it really, for me, it reminds me of, his name's slipping me, so Jimmy will help me out. The artist of the Marvel characters whose art wasn't exactly always pretty, but it just had this style to it. Why am I not thinking of who this is?
Current or back then?
What's that?
Current or back then?
Back then. It was like 1960s. Why am I... His name will come to me in a minute. But Miller's art had a feel to it, had a style to it. But you look at Dark Knight 2, and you look at this image, and it just looks like he's sloppy. I mean, honestly, it's as though he's completely wasted when he's drawing these things. Like, he's just drunk. and he can't draw a straight line. That's what it really, like, look at it, that's what it looks like. And then if you read Dark Knight 2, you're just, and see, I'm not a fan of Sin City as much as some people are. While I like its tribute to film noir, I'm not a huge fan of, I hated the movies, but I'm not a fan of the storytelling. It's okay, but there are elements in it where I'm just like, geez, Frank Miller, you're just a dirty old man. Like, what is wrong with you? And Dark Knight 2 was that as well. I mean, he tells this love story with Superman and Wonder Woman, and I guarantee you if DC would have let him, he probably would have shown them naked and doing it in the actual comic. But, you know, it just was, it just was over the top, and I just hate every aspect of it. And I'll think of that.
That was the weird thing about Strikes Back, or whatever, Strikes Again, whatever it was called. It was supposed to be like 6 issues, or maybe it was 12 issues, I can't remember, but it only ended up being, what, like 3? Like, it was cut way shorter than it was supposed to be. So who knows what he was trying to do, and DC probably did be like, no, the hell are you thinking, dude? Go
well,
away.
that and it was late. It was late, and so I think he might have planned something out, and then DC was just like, dude, people are waiting for this, and sales are going down, and you've got to get stuff out, and he just rushed it, I think. And, you know, so the storytelling was rushed, and who knows how much of it he actually had planned out. Like, they might have just said, let's do 12 episodes because we can milk these nerds for everything that they have because it's Frank Miller.
Yeah, that is, I totally agree, and it looks like he's doing it again, which is annoying. And when they first announced it, to be honest, I was one of those nerds. I was like, ooh, excited, because I thought they said Scott Snyder was going to work with him on writing this book. And then they came out with another press release, and it wasn't Scott Snyder. I can't remember who was going to work with him instead of Scott, but it was somebody else. Respectable. Okay. And I guess I was so worried about the writing that I never even thought about the artwork. And now that they do the artwork, it's like, oh, dear God, I don't know what they're going to do. This is awful.
Yeah, and not to mention his politics, too, I know have turned a lot of people off, you know, in the way that he's come off as kind of a, you know, a nut job in that regard as well. So I really, part of me almost hopes it's so bad that, like, this is the end. And by the way, it was Jack Kirby was who I was trying to think of with regards to that art just has a style to it, and it's captivating in its almost its awkwardness. It's captivating, but it plays well into the storytelling.
And let that be remembered, Jason forgot Jack Kirby.
I know. I forget my kids' names half the time.
Jack. Who's that guy at Marvel? Lee. Something Lee. I can't remember Lee.
Yeah.
Jim Lee, right? You're talking about Jim Lee?
He's at DC, buddy.
He keeps trading, and he had his own thing going for a while, didn't he? I can't remember.
Yeah, some comic book called Imagery or something.
Yeah, something. There's a lot of really muscly people in it.
Nice.
Is Spawn still going, by the way? Like, what issue are you on for that? Like,
yes,
912?
Still going. I don't think I told you guys this. At Comic-Con 2 years ago, I'm just walking around, and I was walking backwards. I don't remember what I was doing, trying to get somebody's attention. And I turned right into Todd McFarlane, just ran right into him. And it was quick, and I'm like, oh, I'm so sorry. And I just kept walking, and I look back, and I'm like, oh, my God, I just ran into Todd McFarlane. Wish I had something that he could sign, whatever, because, yeah, I know Spawn's gone on forever. But the dude's still amazing. He's done some amazing things. Yeah, totally ran right into Todd McFarlane. He was cool about it. Cool. But, yeah, it was so weird.
Yeah, I'm glad he didn't, like, yell at you. I feel like if I'd have ran into Neil Adams, he would have, like, punched me in the throat or something. That was my encounter with him when I didn't even run into him. He just was mean.
Yeah.
But that's pretty cool. And not to, you know, we don't want to bash on Todd because what he did for comics was fantastic. Like, his new take on Spider-Man just totally revolutionized it. And we look back on it now, and it's I prefer the sort of the classic small-eyed Spider-Man at the time, but I was having none of that classic Spider-Man at the time that McFarlane was drawing those, because it was all about the exaggerated, art, and the over-the-top detail that he put into his artwork was, groundbreaking.
And the group of artists he led to leave Marvel and DC, mainly Marvel, to set up Image Comics, Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Rob Liefeld, God, I can't remember, but there was a ton of them. Eric Larson. They just, really brought a light to creative artist rights and what they owned and didn't own, and it forced Marvel and DC to address that, and that's why we now do have Bob Kane and Siegel and whatever who did Superman. They get their credit.
Schuster.
Thank you. Cleveland boys.
And there's a fight for Bill Finger to get co-credit with Kane as well, because he was a big part of creating Batman, and they've left him off for a long time. So I know I'm behind that movement to get Finger the co-credit with Bob Kane. I think it's important.
I just read somewhere I can't remember what it will be on, but he is now included. Might even be the Batman book, but he was included as co-creator now.
Fantastic. It's good to see they finally did right by that, because that's important. So let's move from DC to Marvel and talk about the release of Avengers: The Age of Ultron on Blu-ray, which one of my favorite memes, by the way, is that when someone took the age, like an age app, and they say the Age of Ultron, oh, it's 44, and they did like the and they say he's like 44 years old. But Age of Ultron, thoughts? Are either of you guys going to go out and get this either digitally or on Blu-ray right now, or are you going to kind of wait till the prices dip down? What's your thoughts on that bad boy?
I'm a huge fan of digital, and now the digital basically comes out 2 or 3 weeks before it hits the shelves at Blu-ray and all that. So I got it a couple weeks ago. I hadn't seen it in the theater. It's not that awesome. I was actually not thrilled with it. It was. I'm glad I paid whatever the digital price was, which seemed to be a little less than most Blu-rays. But it wasn't as good as the first one. And unfortunately, I did see Ant-Man in the theater, and that was amazing. So that might have kind of lowered my enthusiasm for Age of Ultron. I was bummed. It wasn't as good as the first one, or Ant-Man, or Guardians of the Galaxy. So it was just. I guess it was a disappointment for me.
I'm waiting on holiday season, Jason. I guess I would have the same review as Jim. So not to follow his bandwagon, but I remember sitting in the theater with lots of people who don't go to movies or superhero movies, and they're like, "Wow, this is awesome! I love every part of this." And I'm thinking, "Oh, we've got a long way to go with you." I did think the best part of it is going to Hawkeye's, going to his home. So, Hawkeye? Sorry.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, sorry. Like, moment of clarity needed. I thought that was the best scene again. I always like in the Marvel movies where they either slow down or they go back in time. I did like Ultron's voice. It seemed like a little bit too abstract of a villain when you had such a firm Loki in the first movie with aliens. I mean, it's not hard to replicate that or do something similar without doing the same thing. But I felt like when I saw the commercials or any of the trailers for Ultron, I felt like I was listening to the same voice from Iron Man 3. And I was like, well, that just feels like an overlap of Mandarin. I don't know if Ben Kingsley did all of the Mandarin work, but it seemed like the same exact trailer for me. So even just walking into the theater, I was a little bit let down. But based on what Jim said, it seems like that comes into fourth place of those last releases, and I would even put Thor 2 ahead of it for sure, because I thought Thor 2 went places I didn't expect.
I'm gonna go old man for a second here. So this digital age thing, like, get off my lawn here with it. I tried to download the Mad Max movie onto my Apple TV, and it said it took like 3 hours to download, and so then I go back 3 hours later, and I try to play it, and I gotta download it again. What am I doing, Ginny? Like, help me out with this. Like, why is it always that hard to download something? Is it because my Wi-Fi is like probably super slow? I've got a hamster in there like running the thing, or like is it always that difficult?
I don't know if kids watch our show like under 30, but I want them to just let's let them stop laughing at you real quick, and then we'll go ahead. Yeah, it takes a long time to actually download the film, but you can start watching it before it's fully downloaded.
What? This
Yeah.
newfangled technology. I just don't get it.
And you have to make sure, Jason, while you're watching it, that you get the rabbit ears in the exact right position that is lined up with the signal coming in. Maybe that's what you're doing wrong. I don't know.
That's a classic Cosby Show episode when they're moving. I think Alvin and the oldest daughter's name, and it's Eagles Giants, but they make Alvin stand with the rabbit ears the whole time.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jason, you don't have to wait for the whole thing to download, my friend.
Well, that would have been nice to know. You whippersnappers need to tell me how to run this stuff. And then now that it's on my Apple TV, is it there? Like, can I watch it anytime I want, or do I have to wait again?
Well, we don't have enough time in the show to explain the cloud, so I'm not even going to try.
All right. So that's good to know that I didn't have to wait for it to finish downloading and start watching it, because I got some grading done, so that was good for, so I don't get fired. That's always a positive.
Yeah.
But anyway, I'm excited for it. I may try it on the digital download, because the thing I like the best about that is then it doesn't take up your shelf space. So that's kind of nice. But I agree with you guys. I didn't like it as much as everybody else did. I think you're right. The general public just was like fawning over it. It was a spectacle. I thought that the storyline was okay. I liked the sort of Dr. Frankenstein thing they had going with Stark and Hulk there for a little bit. I liked James Spader as the villain. He was fantastic as Ultron. I liked some of the little Easter eggs that were put in there. But I hated
the Vision. I thought that was cool how they did the Vision.
Yes, the Vision was cool as well. He was pretty awesome. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were okay. But they were kind of cliche and sort of just plot devices more than anything. And then I hated the relationship between Black Widow and Hulk. Just didn't like it at all. Felt it was forced. Felt that they made Black Widow the stereotypical, like, the woman there to make the male character a better hero. And then the other thing I didn't care for it was it also seemed to play as a trailer for the other Marvel movies. When they were all having their individual flashbacks, it's like, look, here comes Thor 3. This is what that'll be about. Which we were all like, I don't know what that is. That's confusing as hell. But, they kind of did each one like that. And then, of course, the most interesting backstory for us, I felt, was Black Widow's. And yet we're not going to get a Black Widow movie, which is just, it was sort of infuriating. But I agree. Guardians of the Galaxy better, Ant-Man better, especially because Ant-Man is a different movie. And I think that's people that don't like Ant-Man, it's because they aren't realizing that it's not Guardians and it's not Avengers and it's not Thor and it's not Iron Man. It's its own movie. It's caper, right? It's a crime caper kind of movie. And if you realize it for what it is, you can perhaps enjoy it better. But I thought it was fantastic, and I'm looking forward to his character being implemented into the next Avengers movie.
Now, I do want to do a quick shout-out. A great poster artist by the name of Tyler Stout did a special print for the release of this movie on videos, Age of Ultron, with our friends at Hero Complex Gallery. And Tyler's been laying low for quite some time, about a year. He did do a print for Alien, which was okay, not great. But he really came back with a great print for Avengers Ultron, Age of Ultron, which was, I was torn because the movie's not awesome, but the poster was amazing. He did this once before with Iron Man 2, where the movie was but the poster was just amazing. So I was like, oh, cool. But it was nice to see him back, which I want to segue that into. He had another poster release, 2 in 1 week, and we really hadn't seen anything in a year, for the Goonies, which showed at MondoCon 2 this year, which I had the pleasure of going to, and I got to see the Goonies on 35mm film in a theater, which I didn't even do back in the 80s. I didn't see that ever in a theater. It was an awesome experience, but it was funny to see a movie that you saw as a kid, and I've seen it on TV here and there. I don't think I've sat through the whole thing again since being a kid, and watching it and going, one, wow, they edited a lot of stuff out on TV, and then 2, being like, oh my God, there are some things that just make this movie awful. And the first thing I thought of, the first one that hit me was, Mouth shows up at the house, and he goes in and immediately starts talking to Sean Astin's character, and then you hear Chunk outside yelling, and Mouth goes over and goes, you have to do the shuffle shuffle before I let you in. And he starts doing that, and then they have this weird complex thing to make the gate open. And I'm like, wait a minute, how did Mouth get in the house right away? Chunk has to sit outside and wait for all this stuff. And I'm like,
it's Chunk's special entrance.
Bad story.
Yeah. Oh yeah, it's just different friends. That's like the person that always, calls the front seat when you're in high school.
Yeah, and it's body shaming at its finest, really. I mean, you got to make the fat kid shake it around a little bit.
Oh,
which, by the way,
those cliches from the 80s, fag was used a lot, and I'm not saying that in a term that I'd like to be using, but one that references something that shows, oh my lord, I can't believe we were using that all the time in the 80s. Retard was through it a lot. It was like, whoa, these things don't fly anymore. And it was like, yikes. Great movie as a kid, but now you watch it again, you're like, wow, I can't believe we said some of those things or did those things. That's crazy.
If you could fine-tune some of the script, it would still be a fun story, right? Like no matter what. And the thing I always tell Ethan, my son, who's 11 and who loves every 80s movies, as I bored everyone with last week, I always point out music to him and how much I think the music plays a role of my enjoying it as a kid at 38, and how it just adds that dimension of intrigue and mystery and curiosity and adventure, and it just feels creepy but not scary. You're not going to turn it off if you're 9 years old. You're going to keep watching. So that's the part that I always enjoy talking to Ethan about.
Well, Cyndi Lauper's soundtrack was amazing. I know that sounds weird, like you're going to laugh, but Cyndi Lauper was great hearing her music in that.
Oh, absolutely. It was a huge part of it. And it's very much an 80s movie. It exists in the 80s. It's, you watch it for that nostalgia aspect. It's still better than most of the kids' movies that come out nowadays as far as the writing. As dated as it is, like you were saying, Jimmy, language-wise and politically incorrect and so forth, it's still, like, story-wise, it's pretty, sound. Like, I mean, you were talking about some of the goofs that you have to, get past. But like, the idea of their motivation is to save their home. It's about family. It's about being outcasts that band together and have this goal that's seemingly impossible, but look what can happen. You have some classic villains in it, some great slapstick humor, which of course my son loved. You have the monster who ends up being the nice guy. All of those things are classic tropes in a lot of storytelling, period, and in a lot of movies, and especially kids' movies. And I remember watching it as a kid, also thinking, with Mikey when he kisses that high school girl, like, and we were all Mikey's age, and we were like, "Whoa, intriguing! Like that would be cool." So for all of those things, I think it still stands as a pretty good movie, but I think we enjoy it more because of the nostalgia and what it was, and we're talking Spielberg too, when he was doing, when it was Raiders of the Lost Ark for kids in a lot of ways, too.
I agree fully.
Well, it was very cool to see it in an audience with a theater. That was cool. And Jason, you're gonna kill me. They had a copy of Batman that they showed before that, which I did not go to. I did not see it. I'm sorry, sir.
It's all right.
They had a awesome poster for that by Ken Taylor. The following night they had Black Swan, which again I've seen it. Not that interested to see the movie theater, but it is a good movie.
Yeah.
And then after that they had Halloween, John Carpenter's Halloween, which was also cool to see in the theater. But once again, you're like, oh my gosh, we've kind of become desensitized to horror films because this is almost like a comedy now. With the music they use to sort of alert you that something's coming on and the deaths that are happening, you're kind of like, that's funny. Like I'm laughing, not because I'm laughing out of fear or being scared. I'm laughing because it's now humorous the way that person died. So that was kind of weird to see it in that respect. But another great poster by Jason Edmiston. If anybody out there who's into poster collecting, and if you know Mondo Tees, you know Mondo, and you know poster collecting, you need to make it to MondoCon in Austin, Texas. It was a lot of fun. We got to go hang out with the artists. I mentioned a few. Oliver Barrett from Cleveland, Ohio. He was great. Gary Pullen from Canada. Jason Edmiston, like I said, is from Canada. Just a lot of great artists. You get to sit there and talk with them. Ken Taylor's from Australia. He really doesn't come to the United States much, so he was there. I got to get my Bounty Hunter Star Wars set signed by him, which was awesome. But these guys just talk to you and hang out with you, and there are lines. Like Mike Mitchell had a line almost the whole time, which is cool because obviously he's popular. But most of the time you didn't have the lines. You weren't like Comic-Con where you're like, oh my God, I got to get through this line. It's very cool. They had some exclusives. Like I said, the Tyler Stout, which we paid I think $100 to see the movie, is now selling for like $600 on the secondary market, which is crazy to me. But it was just a lot of fun. Austin's a fun city. I highly recommend, if you are interested in this all, go to MondoCon next year. Definitely go to mondotees.com and check out what this is all about and see what the poster artwork is. It's screen prints, some G-plays. It's a really cool thing to be into and to collect, and it's just a nice hobby.
So I have one more question about Goonies. When you were able to watch it, did it have the edited out scenes with the octopus or the stealing of the baby Ruth?
It did not, and it's funny because on the poster that Tyler did, there's the octopus, and
awesome.
It was funny because I've never seen the scene with the octopus. I've only ever seen the end where Data references that they've been attacked by an octopus. Right. And I've read about it, and I know it exists now, but always growing up, I always felt it was weird, because it's like, wait a minute, that's something like Chunk or Sean Astin's character should say, because they're the ones known for the tall tales. Data really doesn't do that, so I didn't understand why he was lying. But now that I know that scene was actually shot, but it was never really shown because it was so cheesy from what I've read, it takes on a different tale to it. But it was in the poster that Tyler made, but no, it was not awesome. In the movie that we saw.
Well, and then the Baby Ruth, them shoplifting the Baby Ruth, was cut by Disney because they didn't want kids. It's okay to say fag, but don't steal a Baby Ruth.
Kill 2 federal agents too. That's funny.
Yeah. So interesting, very interesting. The other one that it made me think of, and I don't know if you guys have heard of that, but in Willow, which I know you're a fan of that one, aren't you, Jimmy? The Willow series or the Willow movie?
Juice that I can't remember. Oh yeah, George Lucas. Yes.
It is, but one of the scenes from that, I guess there's a scene, and correct me if I'm wrong, where he's on the boat going to see the old lady who turns into animals or something, if I remember right. It's been a long time since I've seen that. That's a good one to watch with the kids. I'm gonna have to put that on my list. And some sort of monster comes out of the water there and turns into like a kid on the boat, and he ends up having to strike the kid with the oar or something like that. And it was like super like, whoa, this is really violent. And of course now it would be like, yeah, whatever, big deal, because we can put that on The Walking Dead. Who cares?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so interesting, and to piggyback on your, like, hey, go to check out MondoCon and that stuff, and appreciating, art and poster art, go see some older movies. See some movies, people out there. See movies from before you were born, and if nothing else, appreciate what they give you now. So, even Jimmy watching the Halloween and finding it, kind of cheesy and silly, still you appreciate that we don't have the stuff that we can enjoy now if we don't have, Halloween.
Exactly, and seeing it with an audience it makes a world of difference. Because I've seen Halloween since it came out. Obviously, I wasn't old enough to go see it in the theater, so I've seen it on TV and DVD and all that. And it never occurred to me, but sitting with all these people and so a death happens, and we all laughed together. I've never laughed at it when I watched it on DVD, so it's a total different experience when you see it in a theater.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, that's a good point, too.
For the record, I watched Halloween once on Fox, and I thought it was edited, but then I saw something I didn't think I should see. It was like, a Wednesday at 8:45. I'm like, I'm sorry. Is that Jamie Lee Curtis's woo-hoo-hoo? Yes! Good job, Fox. You missed that one, suckers.
That's awesome. Speaking of stuff that isn't edited anymore and Netflix series, there was a quick little kind of teaser trailer for Jessica Jones, where it's nothing but an alarm clock going off, and then she just smashes it with her hand. I think the camera leading in shows like empty liquor bottles and stuff like that. I can't say how excited I am about this. I actually went out and bought all of the issues of Alias, 1 through, I think it's 48 or 50, and I got them all. I want to read them, at least, if not before the series opens, like at some point. I think she's going to be my next topic for the Feminist Fanboy, which I write like every 3 months because I get so busy I don't have time to write things. But I'm excited about that. I don't know if you guys are as geeked about it as I am, or what are your thoughts? Kyle, how about you? Have you know much about Jessica Jones or Alias? Or?
Unfortunately, what I heard was Alias, which reminds me of Sidney Bristow.
Right.
Which reminds me of, that was the only appointment television I've had really in the last 15 years other than Doctor Who.
And the funny thing about it was the series that came out, and I believe Kevin Smith wrote it, came out around the same time as the television show did. So when I saw it on the comic book stands, I'm with you. I thought that's what it was. I thought it was the television show, and it was Max Marvel, which was the adult version of Marvel at the time. Like, it was for adult readers before we had the labels that we have now. And so I sort of just went past it thinking like, oh, I don't want to read a comic version of a television show. But lo and behold, it was this great series of this female character that was a D-lister. She was basically Luke Cage's girlfriend. And from what I've heard, and I want to read it myself, that she's one of the most well-written and strongest female characters that Marvel has to offer. So I'm excited to check that out.
I think we talked about this a little before, Jason, about Civil War. That's really my most knowledge of Jessica Jones, and that she was kind of Switzerland in the middle, not really wanting to. I think she really was leaning towards Captain America's side, but knew that she couldn't really go against Iron Man, so she was sort of a bounty hunter, but she was also tipping off Captain America's side of things. And then I know a little bit about her from Daredevil and Shadowland. Shadowland was not the greatest crossover event, but her Heroes for Hire, I believe, is what it was called. I can't remember who she teamed up with, but it was really interesting, that storyline. But I don't know much about her. I just saw the 4th teaser trailer, which kind of shows her walking in Hell's Kitchen down the street. Nothing is going on. You see some neon signs. It's very beautiful because it's at night. Everything's black. Some neon that's glowing off the streets and such. And then you just see the camera kind of go up the side of a building, and then all of a sudden she's jumping up to the building. So I don't know what that's about. But I'm intrigued, and they really did an amazing job. Drew Goddard did an amazing job with Daredevil. So I just want to see more.
Yeah, I think that what they're doing with that whole gritty, style that they're using fits those characters incredibly well. And I'm excited to see what else they come up with. I'm excited for Jessica Jones. I'm excited for Luke Cage, and they'll that they're all going to cross over, which is something that the CW was doing with Arrow and the Flash that really worked, and I think it's going to be super exciting. And I'm geeked for this one. So
totally agree.
And I will wait on your reviews, and then I will watch it.
Right. Well, and then you can binge watch them all in one shot and be good to go. You're good.
I cannot wait for some snowstorms. Yeah.
Awesome. So let's wrap up with, Kyle, something that we talked about last week, which was James Bond, and something that you're kind of working on. Can you give us? It's about the Bond villains, right? Can you explain to us what it is that your store is starting to come up with, and maybe give us a little bit of a teaser as to what we can expect from it?
Well, actually, a little bit different. I've had the pleasure of receiving some James Bond memorabilia, merchandise, and books as part of that. And they all review the movie, or they review the movie and the book, and then they give you a breakdown, plot synopsis. They'll tell you the body count. They'll tell you the who played whom or who played who. And so as I enjoy watching all the movies start to finish again in a row, and I'm at The World Is Not Enough, so I have a little bit of time to do some special features in between now and November the 6th. But I'm doing a 30 days top 5 list each day of my own stuff. So today was, and Jimmy played along, but today was top 5 things I could think of that James Bond either borrows or steals or sort of manipulates into the plan that wasn't part of the original plan. So Jim asked, how about Little Nelly, the yellow helicopter that Q brings him in Japan and You Only Live Twice? Well, that's part of the plan, so I didn't include that, but that would have been number 1. However, I did make my own exception, which it's my list, so I can do whatever I want. I'm not quite certain of the jetpack and Thunderball, but it's one of those things that's game-changing for the movie at the time, and years later, people on vacation, such as myself, want to pay to rent one of them, or go up for 3 trials on the water-based kind that you can find like at Lake Erie or at Oceans or vacation hotspots. So some of the other things. So let me go back. The things that I'm going to try not to do are top 5 villains, just hard as well as overdone. Top 5 henchmen. I may do my Bond preferences in order. That might be the conclusion. I'm not real good at cars. I look at them. They look nice. They're all nice. I would take all of them, but not very discerning. But I'm going to do, coming up, like product placement. Coming up, I'm going to do like sort of cultural things that they choose to go to or include in the story. Some of my favorite locations, some of my worst dressed, not the tease, but Sean Connery in Miami, horrible, just horrible. I'm going to see if I can find enough in my memory banks for most sexist comments because Sean Connery, he'll be happy to slap you on the booty, and run along. He even says something like "man talk," like okay, because he's the guy with the most class. I'm working on drinks that are not vodka martinis or different kinds of classic cocktails. I mean, he does drink a lot, frequently. In fact, more champagne, I think, than vodka, actually. So I've enjoyed doing that. I mean, it's my own undertaking. Hopefully I can figure out enough ways to make it 30 days. So, yeah, we're looking at 29 more sleeps until Spectre.
Oh, very exciting.
So, were you okay rolling?
Say again, Jim?
Were you okay with me?
Oh, yeah, I loved it. I don't know if my manager loved it, and I hope she's not watching this, but I was diverted a couple of minutes at work, 3 or 4 times today. I enjoyed answering. Jim referenced the Beach Boys in A View to a Kill, which is while he's on a surfboard, or excuse me, while he's on a snowboard or a makeshift skis that become a snowboard or something. It's brutal, just brutal.
Brilliant.
Watch. Yeah, unfortunately, A View to a Kill and I think The Spy Who Loved Me are like two of the worst, where they just dated themselves by trying to be cutting edge with something that fell out of favor right away. But yeah, that was really fun. I would enjoy more discussion. Unfortunately, I don't think there's anybody else that knows them as well as the person that piped in today.
That's why I was wondering where the and I had other questions like water skiing behind a private plane and alligators to escape a swamp.
Yeah, alligator's good. Which movie are you referencing for the
License to Kill?
Oh.
Remember when he's busting up the road change, and he's on the submersible that comes up and he's stabbing all the drugs, and then he somehow hooks up the what was it, the harpoon gun, and he's having to a little bit, then he grabs the plane by his arm and they take off.
Oh yeah, that's amazing. That's definitely potentially worthy of being added. It's unfortunately still in License to Kill.
Well, you put Thunderball on there. Come on, man.
That's for you.
Come on.
Is one of your top 5 lists going to be the intro songs? Are you going to have that as one of your 5? Because they're always, I think, intriguing.
I definitely have considered that. From an artistic point of view, I wanted to do the main titles taking out the music, and then I will probably do music. That you don't even have to be a James Bond, I think, for that to enjoy it. If you have had a radio near you the last 50 years, there's a chance you've heard half of them. So I don't think there are any that I like that are not critically reviewed or favored or less than popular. Whereas I enjoy having conversations with people about how good On Her Majesty's Secret Service is. How much Jim likes License to Kill and how much I dislike it. But yeah, I think it's definitely a possibility. That one didn't make the list yet, but that one's an easy one. That doesn't take too long. It's funny if you watch all of them in a row and you see the writer and how many of the lyrics are written. It's not too tricky. I'm not saying that I could do that, but they definitely have a theme, and they tell sort of the same story. I think Wayne Brady did a marvelous job on an episode of Whose Line Is It Anyway, where he sang a Bond theme song. Also, looking back at the credits, I enjoy all of the similarities. So I'm trying to find some of the nuanced differences to try and sort of point out that artistic value where I feel like essentially you've had two artists do 50 years of movies. And the first gentleman, I think, went until License to Kill, and that was Morty Spinder. And then Daniel Kleinman's done everything from GoldenEye since. And it's interesting to see sort of their own progression as well as I would like some more change. And I don't know if they have that opportunity or if it's been asked to be sort of formulaic. But if you watch GoldenEye, there are lots of references to Janice and sort of the Steel Curtain and Russia, and when you watch Tomorrow Never Dies, you get sort of the news media, and if you watch The World Is Not Enough, you get oil. So you start to see those themes, and so I've been paying more attention to that, and it's pretty obvious in Skyfall, if you pay attention to all the details, that he's going home.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, I think that should wrap up our episode for today. So thank you, Kyle, for joining us yet again, and we hope
my pleasure.
Several more times. Jimmy, you want to take us out?
Sure. Make sure you check us out on nerdlocker.com, YouTube/Nerdlocker, Facebook/Nerdlocker, Twitter/Nerdlocker, Instagram/Nerdlocker, and Two Nerdy Dads on YouTube. I can't remember, honestly, if we have a YouTube or a Facebook and Two Nerdy Dads yet, but we will. And, of course, on iTunes. As always, Jason, what do we say?
Have a nerdy week, everybody.